the special favor of Allah. Awliya Allah. The universe is the body and its soul. Awliya Allah. Awliya Allah.
Alhamdulillahi Rabbil Alameen, wassalatu wassalamu ala Sayyidil Mursaleen. Amma ba'd, fa'awudhu billahi minash shaitanir rajeem, bismillahir rahmanir rahim. As-salatu wassalamu alayka ya Rasulullah, wa ala alika wa ashabika ya Habiballah. As-salatu wassalamu alayka ya Nabiyallah, wa ala alika wa ashabika ya Nurallah. Viewers of Madani Channel, welcome to this special series of programs, Yesterday, Today and Tomorrow. And in this series of programs, we look to our past, we look to our rich heritage, we look to our pious predecessors, we look to the companions of the Prophet of Allah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, we look at the life of the Prophet of Allah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. And in each one of these individuals, there are many, many great lessons that we can learn of how we can live our life. So let's look at what's happened yesterday to make a change today so that we can have a better tomorrow. We're going to begin by giving you a blessing of reciting Durud Pak upon the Prophet of Allah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. And today's blessing that we're going to give you is actually specific to the day of Friday and the night of Friday. But before I begin and give you this blessing, just to let you know that when does the night of Friday start? Does it start at Thursday night at midnight? No, it doesn't. Thursday night at Maghrib, when Salatul Maghrib, when the sun sets, the night of Friday begins. From that moment on until sun arise in the morning, it is the night of Friday. So the night of Friday and the day of Friday finishes on sunset on the day of Friday. The Prophet of Allah sallallahu alaihi wasallam said that the one who recites salat upon me 100 times on Friday and the night of Friday, Allah Azza wa Jal will fulfill 100 of his needs. Allahu Akbar. Viewers of Madani Channel, today it is a time where unfortunately we don't have time. People are not willing to give time. People are not willing to give money. People are not willing to give anything. People are not willing to give any form of sacrifice. But if we look at our past, if we look at our pious predecessors, we look at the companions of the Prophet of Allah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, we look at the life of the Prophet of Allah sallallahu alaihi wasallam himself, then we realize that the deen that we have got today, the way it has come here today, it has come here through sacrifices. And we need to understand them sacrifices so that we can learn to make them sacrifices as well. I'm going to give you an incident that took place. It has been narrated that one day the minister of Khalifa Harun Rashid, Sayyidina Abdullah bin Musharraf, rahmatullah, he was the minister of him. He was sitting before Harun Rashid and he said, "O Khalifa of the Muslims, if someone requests you to return him the slave who has come to you after running away for him, then what would you do?" And he said, "Well, I would return the slave." Abdullah bin Musharraf rahmatullah said that I am also the slave of Allah Azza wa Jal, Allahu Akbar, who has come after running away from his real master. Please leave me so that I can go back to him again. Allahu Akbar. Having heard this, the Khalifa Harun Rashid and all the people present there were wept. And then the Khalifa said that this person, he has achieved salvation amongst us, whereas we are sitting here only looking at him. Having said this, Khalifa Harun Rashid gave him permission to leave. And after listening to the permission, Sayyidina Abdullah bin Musharraf rahmatullah stood up, he tied his ihram and he went, "Labbaik Allahumma labbaik," and he went towards the blessed haram. Now on the way of this journey, Sayyidina Sufyan Sawri rahmatullah ta'ala met him and saw that he was sleeping on the floor. Dust was settling on his face. Sayyidina Sufyan Sawri rahmatullah ta'ala said to him, he gives salam to him and he says to him, "Oh Abdullah, what has Allah Azza wa Jal given you for giving up everything? You've given up everything. What has He given you?" And he rahmatullah ta'ala replied that, "O Sufyan, in return for sacrificing the ministry and other possessions, Allah Azza wa Jal has blessed me with His pleasure, which I am experiencing right now." When the great Islamic scholars of the sacred haram learned that a pious minister had arrived, they all came and they greeted him. And after seeing his weakness and dust-covered body, they all asked him, "How did you endure the troubles of this journey in the plain which has no shade and no water?" Sayyidina Abdullah bin Musharraf rahmatullah ta'ala replied, How does the criminal slave, whose heart is taking him to the door of his master, come to the court of his master? If I had the power, I would have come headlong, I would have walked on my head. Saying this, he started weeping. And when he asked as to why he was weeping, he replied, I have sent my helper before me. Perhaps his intercession will be accepted. And when he saw the Baytullah, Allahu Akbar, he raised a loud cry and departed from this world. Viewers of Madani Channel, surely we can see that our pious predecessors, they made many sacrifices in the way of Allah Azza wa Jal. Sometimes they sacrificed wealth, and sometimes they sacrificed their lives. Sometimes they sacrificed their kingship, and sometimes their ministries. In short, viewers of Madani Channel, whenever and whatever sacrifice was needed, they made it in the way of Allah Azza wa Jal. And this can be seen from this particular event where he was a minister, he was living a life of luxury, he had nothing to worry about. He had everything that he wanted in this dunya, but no, he wanted the pleasure of Allah Azza wa Jal. And because of this, he sacrificed all of that, went on this difficult journey in which he was covered in dust and he was sleeping on the floor, but he went there to please his Rabb. Allahu Akbar. If we look at the Anbiya, the blessed Anbiya, we look at the companions, and then later on the pious saints, all of them made sacrifices. All of them made sacrifices. Nobody in the history of Islam achieved any status without some form of sacrifice. And you can look at every single pious predecessor, every single companion, every single prophet, they all had to make sacrifices. And them sacrifices that were made so that we have the deen of Islam today. Even the Anbiya, they all made sacrifices. In the age of Sayyidina Adam alayhi salatu wassalam, his son Sayyidina Habil rahmatullah ta'ala adopting piety for the sake of Allah Azza wa Jal, he first presented his possession, a goat, for sacrifice, and then he sacrificed his own life. Allah Azza wa Jal stated in Surah Al-Ma'idah part 6, and the commentators have mentioned this event in detail. It is stated, Habil and Qabil were both the sons of Sayyidina Adam alayhi salatu wasalam. It is said that the first person who committed murder on the earth, Qabil, and the first person who was murdered was Habil. It happened as such, it stated, that Sayyidina Hawa rahmatullah ta'ala would give birth to twins, and one was a baby boy and the other was a baby girl. The boy of one pregnancy was married to the girl of another pregnancy. And following this tradition, Sayyidina Adam alayhi salatu wasalam wanted to marry Qabil with Liuza, who was born with Habil. But Qabil, he expressed his discontent over the decision because Aklima was more beautiful, and that's why he decided to get her. Now Sayyidina Adam alayhi salatu wasalam tried to explain to Qabil that Aqlim was born with him, therefore she was his sister and he cannot marry her. But Qabil remained disobedient. Finally, Sayyidina Adam alayhi salatu wasalam ordered them to make the sacrifices in the court of Allah Azza wa Jal, and the one whose sacrifice was accepted will deserve Aqlima. So in those days, the sign of acceptance of sacrifice was that a fire from the sky would come down and engulf this sacrifice. Therefore, Qabil offered some grains of wheat, and Habil, a goat for sacrifice. The heavenly fire engulfed the sacrifice of Habil and left the wheat grains of Qabil. At this, Qabil bore malice and felt jealousy of Habil and intended to murder Sayyidina Habil radiyallahu anhu. He threatened Habil that he would kill him. Sayyidina Habil radiyallahu anhu said to him that, O Qabil, acceptance of sacrifice is from Allah Azza wa Jal, and He accepts the sacrifice of only pious and sincere people. He further said, if you had been pious, then your sacrifice would have been accepted. Allahu Akbar. We can also understand, viewers of Madani Channel, that offering sacrifices in the way of Allah Azza wa Jal was initiated in the blessed age of Sayyidina Adam alayhi salatu wasalam. And it has remained the blessed method of the blessed Anbiya. The blessed Anbiya traveled through rugged lands, they suffered great problems, they faced evil forces, and they made the sacrifice of their sacred lives were necessary only for the pleasure of Allah Azza wa Jal. Allahu Akbar. Sayyidina Abu Ubaidah radiyallahu anhu narrated, he said that I humbly asked the Prophet of Allah sallallahu alaihi wasallam that who will be tormented the most on the day of judgment? Allahu Akbar. The Prophet of Allah sallallahu alaihi wasallam replied, the one who murdered a Nabi or murdered the one who enjoyed to do good and prevented them from evil. Bani Israel martyred 43 Anbiya in the initial time of the morning. 112 worshipping scholars of Bani Israel stood up and enjoined them to do good and prevented them from evil. So Bani Israel martyred all of them too in the last part of the day. Viewers of the channel, we can see that many blessed Anbiya sacrificed their lives in the right path. And inshallah, we're going to hear some of the sacrifices that were made by the companions of the Prophet of Allah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, some of the sacrifices that were made by the Prophet of Allah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, some of the sacrifices that were made by our pious predecessors. And inshallah, time permitting, we'll give you one of the sacrifices that was made by Amir. We're going to take a small break now, inshallah. We're going to go to the break. We're going to have a package now, and then when we come back, we're going to continue with the topic of the sacrifices of our pious predecessors. Let's go to the break. Sallu ala al-Habib sallallahu ta'ala ala Muhammad sallallahu alayhi wasallam.
How many bad habits have I quit so far? Try to do that analysis on a regular basis. That today I quit that bad habit and adopted this good one. Well, I would suggest you should write down. On top, give it a heading of good habits. When you're listing down good habits, you can write generosity, you can write speaking truth. It is also surely a good habit to offer 5 daily salah. And further, you can write forgiving others' mistakes, patience, tolerance, forbearance. And furthermore, you can write smiling, which is for the pleasure of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and pleasing someone's heart, inviting others towards righteousness. Like this, try to list down all good habits. Once this list is done, then write other side bad habits. And also write down all the bad habits, like telling lie is a bad habit, and backbiting, slandering, tale-telling, and furthermore hurting others' feelings. Surely a worst habit. Not offering salah is no doubt a bad habit. Whereas in good habits, you can write down various forms of worships, tasbih, salah, recitation of Quran. These are few examples which we can list down. My humble suggestion is that you should make a list, write all good and bad habits. Now, once you've done that, then comes the analysis. And this is a general list. And making lists, you don't need to focus yourself. You just write good and bad habits. And of course, you won't be able to write all good and all bad habits when you'll start writing them down. But many bad and good habits will come on paper in front of you. Then analyze what are your shortcomings. These good habits are not present in my personality. If present, then they are to the extent of very less degree. For example, people have very low temperament, get angry very quickly. If you think that you've got this temperament issue, try to work and remove this bad quality from your personality. Likewise, keep on looking at your list where improvements are needed, and also that how can I add more good qualities within my personality, and work for that. Or you can also list down merits and demerits of good or bad company, and benefits of treating your relatives well, and disadvantages of not having good ties with your relatives. And if you want one shortcut, then I can share that. Try to get hold of a booklet called 72 Pious Deeds. In this booklet, many do's and don'ts are mentioned. Many good and bad habits are mentioned. I'm sure, inshallah, you'll find that very helpful. Do try to get hold of that booklet.
Sallu ala al-Habib sallallahu ta'ala ala Muhammad sallallahu alayhi wasallam. MashaAllah. Viewers of Madani Channel, welcome back to this program yesterday, today and tomorrow. And in these series of programs, we look at our past, we look at our rich heritage, we look at the lives of our pious predecessors, and we try to learn some lessons from yesterday so that we can make a change today, so that we can have a better tomorrow. Today we're talking about the sacrifices that were made by our pious predecessors. And before the break, we talked about the sacrifices that were made by Sayyidina Adam ﷺ's children and himself. Now we're going to give you an incident that you're probably all aware of, but just to highlight the incident so that you're aware of the sacrifices that were made. It is stated that after the birth of Sayyidina Ismail ﷺ, his father, Sayyidina Ibrahim ﷺ, received a divine revelation. And this divine revelation told him to take his wife, Sayyidina Hajra radiyallahu ta'ala, and Sayyidina Ismail ﷺ to a land where Makkatul Mukarramah is situated now. Now at that time, this place was a barren land. So Sayyidina Ibrahim ﷺ, on the command of Allah Azza wa Jalla, took both of them to land Avarim from Syria on a Buraq and left them near the sacred Kaaba. At that time, there was neither any population, nor any spring, nor any sign of water there as well. Now Sayyidina Ibrahim ﷺ placed some dates in a traveling bag and gave water in a pot and then returned without looking back to them. Sayyidina Hajra radiyallahu ta'ala, she humbly said to her husband, "Where are you going, leaving us helplessly in this lonely desert without anybody knowing us. But Sayyidina Ibrahim ﷺ did not give any reply to it, nor did he pay any attention to her. She said this twice to him, and twice, after the third time, he still did not say anything. After the third time, Hajara radiallahu ta'ala then said to him, that has Allah Azza wa Jal commanded you to do this? Has Allah Azza wa Jal commanded you to do this? Now think about this, that they'd left their land, they'd come here, and all this time, he'd not told his blessed wife that this is why we are coming and this is what I'm going to do. She listened to him and obeyed him and went on that journey. And when he heard this, he replied in the positive. And when Sayyidina Hajara radiallahu ta'ala heard this, she felt satisfied. And Sayyidina Ibrahim salatu wasalam went back. It is stated that Sayyidina Hajara radiallahu ta'ala started breastfeeding her son, Sayyidina Ismail salatu wasalam. And when she ran out of the water she had and felt very thirsty, even her son also started to feel thirsty. She ran between Safa and Marwa 7 times in search for water or a populated area until the spring Zamzam emerged from the dry land after either an angel hit it with its wing or with the blessed foot of Sayyidina Ismail salatu wasalam. Allahu Akbar. The sacrifices that were made on the command of Allah Azza wa Jal, the sacrifices that were made to attain the pleasure of Allah Azza wa Jal, the sacrifices that are made in fulfilling the commands of Allah Azza wa Jal. If we look at our lives now, you know, the command, the basic command from Allah Azza wa Jal is to read our namaz 5 times a day. We cannot even sacrifice lifting that blanket off us at Fajr. We cannot even sacrifice going to the washroom and having wuzu with cold water. We cannot even sacrifice going out, you know, on going to the masjid in our cars that have got heating inside them and we've got warm clothes and the masjid's got heating in them as well. We can't do it. We can't make that sacrifice. What is wrong with us? Have we not seen what our pious predecessors, what they did with their lives and the sacrifices that they made? Can we not even contemplate to try and make these basic sacrifices to attain the pleasure of Allah in fulfilling the commands of our Rabb? Just think if our Rabb made us, He said to us that when your child is born, your first child is born, take them to a desert and leave your wife there and leave your child there and do not look back. How would we fare? Yes, without doubt, we're talking here about the Anbiya, we're talking here about the Prophets, and they're obviously a different category of people. But at the end of the day, they are human beings, they have needs, they have wants, they love their children, they love their wives, but they made these sacrifices. In the childhood of Sayyidina Ismail ﷺ, on the 8th night of Zul Hajj, Sayyidina Ibrahim ﷺ dreamt that someone was saying to him, undoubtedly, Allah Azza wa Jalla has commanded you to slaughter your son. From morning to evening, he kept contemplating whether the dream was from Allah Azza wa Jalla or whether it was from shaitan. And that's why the 8th of Zul Hajj is known as the day of contemplation. On the 9th of Zul Hajj, he had the same dream and believed that the command was from Allah Azza wa Jalla. That is why the 9th of Zul Hajj is known as the day of recognition. And after he had the same dream again on the 10th of Zul Hajj, acting upon the dream, he made a firm intention to sacrifice his son. And that is why the 10th of Zul Hajj is known as the day of sacrifice. He was willing to sacrifice his son on the command of Allah Azza wa Jalla. And that's why every year Muslims all around the world, because the son was replaced with a ram, we take a goat, a sheep, a ram, a cow or a camel, and we sacrifice these for the pleasure of Allah Azza wa Jalla. Again, just think if that ultimate sacrifice was asked upon us to sacrifice our children, could we do it? Could we sacrifice the children that we love? No. It is a blessing from Allah Azza wa Jalla that Allah Azza wa Jalla is not testing us that way. The Anbiya were tested at a greater level, but our tests, do we fulfill our tests? When the time for Qurbani comes, we make all sorts of excuses not even to do that. You know, we're talking about namaz, we're not even willing to make these basic sacrifices in our lives. And surely, you know, the status of the Anbiya is such that their sacrifices were greater, but look at the patience that he had. Look at the steadfastness they had. Look at these blessed personalities. These are the people that we need to read about. We need to learn about their lives. We need to realize the hardships that they endured, the difficulties that they had, and they happily did them. They happily endured these difficulties. These are the great sacrifices of these people which have become leading rules for people forever. Forever we will remember the sacrifices that have been mentioned. It has been understood from this parable that Sayyidina Ismail Islam was very dear and obedient Nabi of Allah Azza wa Jal. That Allah Azza wa Jal blessed him with special favors and honors. And that's why he remained steadfast on whatever hardship he faced from Allah Azza wa Jal and got ready wholeheartedly for the sacrifice of Allah Azza wa Jal when Allah Azza wa Jal commanded his father to make it. That when his father was commanded, even then, he was a child, but he still didn't stop his father because he knew it was the command of Allah Azza wa Jal. And the child, he was blessed within old age. It was a loved child by Sayyidina Ibrahim ﷺ, because he was blessed with his child in old age after so many du'as. He was the coolness of his eyes, the coolness of his heart. He could not separate himself from him. But for the sake of Allah Azza wa Jal, Sayyidina Ibrahim ﷺ left him with his wife at that deserted, isolated place of the valley where there was neither a single leaf or any tree covering or anything. No water, no nothing. If any of us had been there, just the idea of doing something like this would have made our heart beat faster. Or rather, it would have failed due to the immense sorrow. But Sayyidina Ibrahim ﷺ never grew anxious, nor suffered distress, and nor started contemplating deeply after listening to the divine command, but rather he fulfilled the command of his Lord, and for the divine pleasure, he, along with his family, immediately went to Mecca from Syria, and then after that, leaving his family in Mecca, he returned to Syria. Allahu Akbar. Like all the other blessed Anbiya, the Prophet of Allah ﷺ also made many sacrifices, countless sacrifices. Everybody knows about the sacrifices that he made. After the declaration of prophethood, the unbelievers inflicted great oppression and cruelty upon the noble Prophet of Allah ﷺ. Rubbish was thrown on him. The entrails of animals were thrown on the back of him. People would throw stones at him. He was oppressed and persecuted to such an extent by his own people. He then immigrated, and the companions, they made these ultimate sacrifices as well. They emigrated to the city of Medina, and in the city of Medina, these people that were previously his family, his tribe, they now hated all the people of Medina as well, and they attacked them, and battles took place. In battles in which the Prophet of Allah ﷺ himself was injured, battles in which the companions of the Prophet of Allah ﷺ were martyred. These all took place, and yet the Prophet of Allah ﷺ endured all of these so that the deen of Islam can come to us. Nowadays, we ask the brothers to make a sacrifice, travel in the way of Allah Azza wa Jal for 3 days, we say to them, and we find it so hard. 3 days in a Madani Qafla, traveling in the way of Allah. We find it so hard to do that. Is this what we have become? That we're not willing to make any sacrifices? We haven't got time? We're not willing to spend in the way of Allah Azza wa Jal? We're not willing to make any sacrifices whatsoever? And this is something that we need to contemplate, viewers of my channel. We need to understand that if this is what's happening to us, that we're not willing to make any sacrifices, then are we avoiding our responsibility? Are we not playing our part? And I've mentioned this many times before, that if we go back in our history, except for those that are Sayyid amongst us, if we go back in our history, we'll find a time where someone made a sacrifice. And it wasn't our family. No. Someone made a sacrifice and invited our family to the fold of Islam. Someone met your relatives maybe 100 years ago, 150 years ago, maybe 20 years ago, maybe 200 years ago. They met your family and invited them to the fold of Islam. Now that might seem like nothing to you, but that was probably the most important day in the history of your family. Let's go to the break. Sallu ala al-Habib sallallahu ta'ala ala Muhammad sallallahu alayhi wa sallam.
Ya Muawiya, Ya Muawiya, Ya Muawiya, Katibe wahi, Sahabe Nabi, wo jannati mere Muawiya. मुसल्लमो सुबूत है फजीलते मुआविया, आया है शम्स की तरह करामते मुआविया। मुसल्लमो सुबूत है फजीलते मुआविया, आया है शम्स की तरह करामते मुआविया। वो जिससे रूठ जाए तो रसूल उससे रूठ जाए, वो जिससे रूठ जाए तो रसूल उससे रूठ जाए। नबी से इस तरह की है कराबत मुआविया। मुसल्लमो सुबूत है फजीलत मुआविया, आया है शम्स की तरह करामत मुआविया। मुसल्लमो सुबूत है फजीलत मुआविया, आया है शम्स की जरा करामते मुआविया के प्यार से हमारा बेड़ा पार है। मुआविया के प्यार से हमारा बेड़ा पार है। गुनाह बख्शवाएगी शफाअत मुआविया। सुबूत है फजीलत मुआविया। आया है शम्स की जरा करामत मुआविया। सुबूत है फजीलत मुआविया। आया है शम्स की जरा करामत मुआविया। कहा गया दिलो ज़का मुहद्दिसीन ने उन्हें। कहा गया दिलो ज़का मुहद्दिसीन ने उन्हें। हदीस में है मुस्तनद रिवायत मुआविया। सुबूत है फजीलत मुआविया। आया है शम्स की जरा करामत मुआविया। सुबूत है फजीलत मुआविया। आया है शम्स की जरा करामत मुआविया। ये गोगरे हयात गए ये तो शहे निजात गए। ये गोगरे हयात गए ये तो शहे निजात गए। दिले फरीद को मिली मोहब्बत मुआविया। सुबूत है फजीलत मुआविया। आया है शम्स की जरा करामत मुआविया। सुबूत है फजीलत मुआविया। आया है शम्स की जरा करामत मुआविया। या मुआविया या मुआविया या मुआविया या मुआविया।
सल्लू अलल हबीब sallallahu ta'ala ala Muhammad sallallahu alayhi wa sallam. MashaAllah, viewers of my channel, you're watching yesterday, today and tomorrow. Viewers of my channel, today, in today's program, we're talking about the sacrifices that were made by our pious predecessors. And before the break, we mentioned some of the sacrifices that were made by the Prophet Sayyidina Ibrahim wasalam. We mentioned some of the sacrifices that were made by the Prophet of Allah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. And there are countless sacrifices that were made by him that a whole series of programs would not be enough to describe the sacrifices that were made by him. And it's because of the sacrifices that were made by the Prophet of Allah sallallahu alaihi wasallam that the deen is with us today. But also the companions. The companions also made many sacrifices in their age. Some blessed companions migrated to Medina from Mecca, abandoning their homes and household goals, and they earned the title as the Muhajir, the people that had been migrated. Blessed companions in Medina to Munawwara also made great sacrifices. They set the example of being Ansar, the helpers who sacrificed their houses, lands, property, and other necessary things for their migrant brothers. A large number of blessed companions sacrificed their lives for the propagation of Islam and attained the status of martyrdom. Some sacrificed their wealth, some sacrificed possessions, some sacrificed everything that they had, their lives and everything, inshallah. We're going to mention just one companion and the sacrifices that he made. Sayyidina Abdul Rahman bin Auf, radiyallahu ta'ala. His sacrifices were quite unique. It is stated that he once gave 4,000 dinars in charity. 4,000 dinars. You know, a dinar is a gold coin, by the way. So imagine a gold coin, 4,000 dinars. He gave 40,000 dinars in the way of Allah Azza wa Jalla. Once he gave 500 horses to the Mujahideen in the way of Allah Azza wa Jalla. Once he made a will to give 50,000 dinars in charity at the time of his demise. Once, when he was ill, he made a will to give 1/3 of his wealth in charity. But later on, when he recovered, he himself gave the wealth in charity. You know, you may say, oh, well, he must have been a very rich person, wouldn't he? He must have been very rich to be able to give all this. Yes, Allah Azza wa Jalla blessed him with wealth, but how many of us are blessed with wealth as well? How many of us, when we are blessed with wealth, we cannot spend that wealth in the way of Allah Azza wa Jalla? How many of us cannot make that sacrifice of giving money in the way of Allah Azza wa Jalla? You may have hundreds of thousands of pounds in your bank, but we fail to give any money. You know, they say that if a person has £10, yeah, and he gives £5, then he's given 50% of his wealth. If a person has 10,000, does he have the heart, the courage to give £5,000 if he's got 10,000 in his bank? No. He'll think that he's given more than this person because this person's only give £5, he'll give £50, he'll give £100, he'll give £200. But in essence, this person has given 50% of his wealth. And this is what we see, that giving this amount of wealth. Once he said to the blessed companions that I will give 400 dinars to each person who took part in the battle of Badr. Allahu Akbar. Once he gave 150,000 dinars in charity only in one day. And at night when he calculated, he said that all of my wealth is sadaqah on the Mujahireen and the Ansar. He said, even give my qameez to such and such person and my imamah to such and such person as well. Sayyidina Jibreel ﷺ came to the Prophet of Allah sallallahu alaihi wasallam and he said to him, Ya Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, the sadaqah of Abdurrahman radiallahu anhu has been accepted. Give him the news, give him the good news of being Jannati, being a dweller of paradise without any accountability. It is said that he also freed 30,000 slaves, yes, 30,000 slaves, and he presented a garden to the blessed wives of the Prophet of Allah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, which was later sold for 40,000 gold dinars. Allahu Akbar. He sacrificed an enormous amount of wealth for the propagation of Islam. And surely, viewers of Madani Channel, when these achievements of our pious people are mentioned, then we should also develop a mindset, a passion for doing such acts. You know, maybe you don't have the money, but we should have this mindset that if Allah Azza wa Jal blesses me, then we will spend in the way of Allah Azza wa Jal. We need to have this mindset for sacrifices our resources, our time in the way of Allah Azza wa Jal. If you got money, then give money. If you not got money, if you got time, then give time. But give something and learn to sacrifice something. And I appeal to all the viewers of Madani Channel that get yourself involved with the environment of Dawat Islami. By getting yourself involved in the environment of Dawat Islami, you will be taught a mindset of sacrifice. Even it's simply going to the weekly ijtama for a couple of hours a week, then going to Balagan classes every day, then going on a Madri Kafla, 3-day Madri Kafla, sacrificing some time in the way of Allah Azza wa Jalla. And we need to develop this mindset. Only then will we be successful, when we can develop this mindset of giving something back. Do you not realize, viewers of Madani Channel, how fortunate you are? That Allah Azza wa Jalla has blessed you with Iman. The greatest gift that you can ever have is your Iman. Allah Azza wa Jalla has blessed you with that. Do we not value it? Do we not feel that we owe something for it? This great gift that we have been given. Do we not owe something to our Rabb? Should we not be thankful to our Rabb? You know, that's the first thing that we need to make. Thankful that what Allah Azza wa Jalla has given us. And we need to develop this mindset to be thankful for whatever Allah Azza wa Jalla has given us. Should we not be thankful that Allah has blessed us with Iman? Should we not be thankful that in praying, in living our life as a Muslim, we do not have to, live our life in the way that the people of the past had to? The sacrifices that they had to just read the namaz, the sacrifice that they had to just to perform the hajj, the sacrifices that they made in spreading the deen of Islam, we're not having to make them sacrifices. Nowadays, when we ask you to travel in a Madri Kafla in the way of Allah Azza wa Jalla, you're greeted by people. People at the masjid greet you, they feed you, they look after you, they put flowers on you. In the past, people were greeted with swords. And when they left, they didn't have, the maps in front of them, they didn't have the internet in front of them. Oh, let me see what the weather's like, what the people are like there, what it's going to be like there, whatever. They never had this. They left. They traveled in the way of Allah, and they traveled blindly to please the Rabb. And then we see the pious predecessors as well, the sacrifices that they made. Sayyidina Shaykh Abdul Qadir Jilani Rahmatullah, the sacrifice that he made, that at a young age, it is said that at the age of 17, he left his home. He left his home and went to the great city of Baghdad. Why did he go? To acquire the knowledge of the deen. To acquire the knowledge of the deen. And when he left, his mother knew that she may never see her son again. So she made the ultimate sacrifice of letting her son go, and he made the ultimate sacrifice of leaving his home, leaving his mother's home. You know, where he's got warm food and a warm bed. He left all that. And then when he went there, you know, you remember the story, he had the gold coins, that money disappeared. And when that money disappeared, what did he do? Did he come home running back to mum? You know, or did he send a message, can you send me some more money? Or did he stay there or what? No, he stayed there, he struggled and he survived. Living off rainwater, eating leaves. Why? Because he knew that this knowledge is a cure for sick souls. He knew that this knowledge is a way to revive people's faith. He knew that this knowledge that he was trying to acquire was a way to bring people closer to their Rabb. Someone that was on the path of deen, that was studying to become a scholar, said to the father that, you're making me an alim. Would it not have been better for me to be a doctor, a lawyer, a barrister, or something like this? And his father said to him, Wallahi, if I knew that if I was to make you a rubbish collector, would bring you closer to your Rabb, then I would have made you a rubbish collector. These are the sacrifices to come closer to the Rabb. And Shaykh Abdul Qadir Jilani Rahmatullah, he made this sacrifice. He sacrificed his whole life to spread the deen of Islam. Viewers of the channel, we're going to have a small break now. We've got a package, inshallah. We're going to go to this package of the day, and then inshallah, we'll come back and finish with some comments with regards to the sacrifices that were made by our pious predecessors. Sallu ala al-Habib, sallallahu ta'ala ala Muhammad, sallallahu alayhi wa sallam.
The world was in darkness and ignorance. There were no rights, no rules, and no morals. It was the rule of the jungle. The strongest, the wealthiest ruled, and there was no value for human life. And then arrived the mercy to the world, the essence and soul of our lives, the coolness and comfort of our eyes, the one whose face is more beautiful than the sunrise, the owner and distributor of paradise. Now slaves were being mistreated, tortured, overworked, with no status in society. They were considered worse than animals. But the arrival of Nabi Kareem sallallahu alayhi wa sallam and his beautiful teachings changed that. Slavery was abolished. The status of a slave was raised to such amazing heights that the leader of the faithful, Hazrat Umar Farooq radiallahu ta'ala, Amir al-Mu'mineen, ruling millions of square miles, and yet he was calling a black Abyssinian slave, my master and my leader, Bilal radiallahu ta'ala. And Hazrat Bilal ibn Kamar radiallahu ta'ala was given such honor and privilege in the court of Nabi Kareem sallallahu alayhi wa sallam that when the peaceful conquest of Makkah happened, Aka Kareem sallallahu alayhi wa sallam gave him permission to climb the glorious Kaaba, stand on the top, and proclaim the azan, the call to prayer. Subhanallah, this was the status given to the slaves that Aka Kareem sallallahu alayhi wa sallam bestowed upon them. When it came to women, they were being mistreated. They were a commodity, a property. They were persecuted and tortured. Their life was a misery. Indeed, there was society that argued that they weren't human, they were actually a form of the devil. Daughters were being buried alive. Mothers were being sold on the marketplace. And then Nabi Kareem sallallahu alayhi wa sallam gave light to this darkness. Daughters that were being buried alive, parents became proud of them. They were a blessing from Allah Azza wa Jal. And mothers who were being sold on the marketplace, Nabi Kareem sallallahu alayhi wa sallam said, the ultimate reward for good deeds was Jannah, was paradise, and the journey started at the feet of your mother. Subhanallah, the world was taken from darkness into light by the beautiful arrival of the best of creation, sallallahu alayhi wa alihi wa sallam. This is why Allah Hazrat writes, Ghamzadun ko raza mujda dijiye ke hai, bekasun ka sahara hamara nabi. Sallu ala al-Habib, sallallahu ta'ala ala Muhammad sallallahu.
Sallu ala al-Habib, sallallahu ta'ala ala Muhammad, sallallahu alayhi wa sallam. MashaAllah. Viewers of the channel, you're watching Yesterday, Today and Tomorrow. And in this program today, we're looking at the sacrifices that were made by our pious predecessors. And earlier on in the program, we mentioned the sacrifices that were made by the Anbiya, Sayyidina Ibrahim alayhi salatu wasalam. We mentioned, only briefly mentioned, scratched the surface in fact, of the sacrifices that were made by the Prophet of Allah, sallallahu ta'ala wasalam. We mentioned some of the sacrifices that were made by the companions, and specifically we mentioned one of the companions as well. And just before the break, we mentioned the sacrifice that was made by Shaykh Abdul Qadir Jilani Rahmatullah, that at the age of 17, he left his home. He left his home, he left the comfort of his home, the comfort of his mother, and left to acquire the knowledge of the deen. And he spent all of his life acquiring and propagating and passing on the knowledge of the deen. And he went and he travelled and he called people to the path of Islam. Khwaja Gharib Nawaz rahmatullah ta'ala, that he travelled to Bukhara, Samarkand at the age of 15, approximately the age of 15. And when he paid a visit to the sacred court of the Prophet of Allah sallallahu alaihi wasallam in Medina, the title of Mu'ideen, the helper of the deen, was bestowed upon him. He was ordered to go to the city of India, Ajmer, and he was ordered to go there to call people towards righteousness. He was told to go to the city of Ajmer and to call people to the path of righteousness, to call people to the deen of Islam. And it said that, many, up to 900,000 or some say 9 million people accepted Islam at the hands of Khwaja Gharib Nawaz rahmatullah. Now the figures, maybe they're not correct, but whatever, it said that a huge number of people accepted Islam at his blessed hands. And again, the sacrifices that were made. Datta Sahab, Allahu Akbar. Datta Ganj Baksh Ali Hajwari rahmatullah, that also sacrificed by leaving his home just for propagating the teaching of Islam. He travelled from Mohalla Hajwari of Ghazni, a city of Afghanistan, and he chose Lahore to reside there forever. Similarly, countless saints, if you look at all the saints, they all abandoned luxury and comfort, the houses and the household goods. They endured great hardship and devoted and sacrificed their lives. I remember once talking to a scholar, mashallah, quite aged scholar, about someone that was studying the deen of Islam, and that in their dream they had seen dogs and snakes on the road to the Jamia that was stopping them from going to study in the Jamiat al-Madinah. And the scholar, he said to me, really? Were they dogs, were they snakes? He didn't realize that I'd said it was a dream. And he said, he kind of said, well, that's normal. He said, anybody that's on this path, anybody that's on the path of Allah, anybody that's on the path to please his Rabb, will never find it easy. There'll always be hardship, there'll always be problems. So these people that are on this path, that are trying to become the scholars of tomorrow, they're the people that also we need to appreciate and help them as well in achieving this ultimate goal of the sacrifices that they are making. Those people that are sacrificing their time in traveling in the way of Allah, going and traveling in the Madri Kafilas, we need to appreciate them as well. That if you hear that a Madri Kafila has come to your masjid, then go and visit them, spend time with them. If not, then at least send some food for them, look after them, be part, and hopefully you can get the sawab. It'd be better still if we can travel in the way of Allah, but at least support those people who are doing it. So be part of those people who can do this. Allah Azza wa Jal tells us that in the Quran there'll be a group of people who will promote what is good and forbid what is evil. And I remember once speaking to Nigarani Shura with regards to this. May Allah Azza wa Jal keep his shadow upon us. And he said to that, the duty of everybody else is to support these people. It's our duty to support these people who are promoting what is good and forbidding what is evil. So we need to be part of this process of making these ultimate sacrifices that the people of the past made. If we look in the present time, Amir al-Sunnat, the founder of Dar Islami, the person, Allahu Akbar, if it was not for him, I would not be sitting here today. If it was not for him, this Madani Channel would not be on today. Everything that you see is all through the fairs and the blessings and the sacrifices. Yes, the sacrifices that Amir al-Sunnat made. Nowadays, we see the scholars of Dar Islami traveling in cars. But he would travel by foot, he would have his own tiffin, he would carry it there. And it said that many a time when he had left the Ijtima or left the masjid, where he had delivered a speech, the buses had finished and he had to walk home for miles and miles. He travelled on bike, he travelled on foot, he travelled on buses, he travelled on trains. He made all them sacrifices so that the deen of Islam could come here. And today, even today, if you watch Madani Channel and you see him, he's not a young man anymore. You watch the Madani Muzakara on Saturday night, sitting there for 2, 3, 4 hours, 5 hours sometimes. How does he do it? This passion for spreading the deen of Islam, this passion to, spread the deen of Islam, this passion for sacrifice for the deen of Islam. And there are many, many instances that we can relate to regards his sacrifice. It is stated on the occasion of Eid al-Adha, 1424. Sheikh al-Tariqat, Amir al-Sunnah, he was actually out of the country of Pakistan. And at some Islamic brothers' insistence, he intended to celebrate Eid al-Adha in Pakistan. But a few days before Eid, Amir al-Sunnah sent this message via email. I'm going to read this to you. In the email, he said that I had a flight confirmed for Friday night, the 8th of Zulhajj. On Wednesday, I felt panic rising within me. I thought long and hard that if I come to Babul Madinah, Karachi, I will be able to celebrate Eid with my family and children and with a large number of Islamic brothers with great favor. Whereas, if I stay here, I'll be able to focus on my written work and continue with this. On one hand, Babul Madinah is surrounded by people. There is a great chance of falling into sins. On the other hand, staying here by myself means I will have less opportunity to commit sins. I will be able to protect the eyes and the tongue, which is extremely difficult amongst the crowds. Whereas here at my residence, it is relatively easy to observe Kufl Madinah of the eyes and the tongue, I protecting them from sins. Therefore, I thought that visiting Babul Madinah, Karachi now will not result in any important activity of religion, but rather it will only please my nafs. He said that the true sacrifice is the one that is very difficult for the nafs, and this is the season of sacrifice. There, it seems appropriate for me to sacrifice my own desires. Thus, keeping this in mind, the tremendous benefits of the hereafter, I've decided to postpone my journey back to Babul Madinah, Karachi. Allahu Akbar. You know, these sacrifices that were made, why can we not make any of these sacrifices? And Views of Madani Channel today, in today's program, we've talked about the sacrifices that were made. You know, we hear that the Prophet of Allah sallallahu alaihi wasallam made countless sacrifices. Everybody knows about the sacrifices that he made. And after declaring prophethood, the Prophet of Allah sallallahu alaihi wasallam was inflicted with great oppression, and the cruelty on him was leveled. Different types of allegations. He was called a cheat, a liar, astaghfirullah. All of these things were put on him. Stones were attempted. His life, the attempts were made on his life. The blessed Anbiya, we see the sacrifices that they made. Sacrifices in the way of Allah that were made by Sayyidina Adam alayhi salatu wasalam, Sayyidina Ibrahim alayhi salatu wasalam. We see that the blessed Anbiya, they were troubled in the path, that 43 Anbiya were martyred for spreading the deen of Islam. Those people that promoted good and forbid evil, they were martyred in the way of Islam as well. We see that the companions of the Prophet of Allah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, the sacrifices that they made. We see from the pious predecessors, the sacrifices that they made. The question I'm asking you, viewers of my channel, what sacrifices are we making? And this is where we go silent, isn't it? This is where we go silent, that we're not making any sacrifices. We're not sacrificing our money. We're not sacrificing our time. We're not sacrificing our nafs. We're not sacrificing the pleasures of this world. We're sacrificing nothing. And it's something that I want you to contemplate on Viewers of my channel. That in our rich heritage, in our pious predecessors, in our companions of the Prophet of Allah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, in the Anbiya, in the lives of the Prophet of Allah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, all of them, they lived their lives with sacrifice after sacrifice after sacrifice. To achieve what? To achieve that the deen of Islam has got to us. So please, viewers of my channel, ponder over this. Ask yourself, look at yourself and think, what sacrifices am I making? What sacrifices should I be making? What sacrifices can I make? And try and make them sacrifices. Try to travel in the way of Allah Azza wa Jalla. Try and spend in the way of Allah Azza wa Jalla before it's too late. Whilst your health allows you to travel in the way of Allah Azza wa Jalla, travel. Whilst you have the wealth, spend in the way of Allah Azza wa Jalla, because these things are a blessing from Allah Azza wa Jalla, and your health and your wealth can be taken away from you. And then all you will have is regrets. Oh, if I was healthy, I would have traveled. Oh, if I had money, I would have given. But it's too late then. It's too late. And whilst you have life, Allahu Akbar, you'll be questioned on the Day of Judgment that what did you do with your life? What did you do with your youth? What did you do with your health? What did you do with your time? What did you do with all these things? Did we make any sacrifices? Viewers of the channel, I ask you, request you to ponder over this and think about this. You've been watching this program yesterday, today and tomorrow, in which we look at our past. We look at the events of yesterday to try and make a change today so that we can have a better tomorrow. Until the next time, keep watching Madani Channel. Sallu ala al-Habib sallallahu ta'ala ala Muhammad sallallahu alayhi wa sallam.
The special favor of Allah.